"Stop. Do not pour that on your arm." Those were the last words I expected to shout during my 28 years as chief medical officer aboard Meridian Station. Yet they became the sentence every medical academy in the galaxy would eventually memorize. My name is Dr. Kaler Vex, and until that morning I believed I understood biology better than anyone under my command. I believed every living species followed predictable rules, every chemical produced measurable reactions, and every patient responded according to science. Then a human named Ethan Carter walked through my emergency room, carrying a small backpack, and everything I knew began to fall apart. He did not arrive on a stretcher. He did not trigger a station-wide emergency response. He simply stepped through the sliding doors under his own power, nodded politely to the reception nurse, and asked if someone could point him toward a sink. At first glance, he looked completely ordinary. White skin lightly covered in dust from the cargo docks, short brown hair, average height, average build, plain work clothes, nothing that suggested military service or advanced survival training. The only unusual detail was the long cut running across his left forearm. Our scanners immediately highlighted the injury and projected dozens of recommendations across my display. Standard protocol required immediate treatment, advanced disinfectants, tissue regeneration gel, and supervised observation. Before my staff could escort him toward an examination bed, Ethan smiled apologetically and said, "I really do not want to take up your time. I can handle this myself." Every medic in the room stopped moving. Patients always wanted professional treatment. Nobody voluntarily refused access to the finest emergency medicine in known space. I walked toward him and introduced myself. "Sir, with respect, that decision is no longer yours. Please allow us to begin treatment immediately." Ethan thanked me with genuine politeness, but instead of following my instructions, he calmly removed his backpack and placed it on the examination table. My assistant quietly whispered that perhaps the human was searching for identification documents. Another guessed he might carry emergency medication prescribed on Earth. Neither of them came close to the truth. Ethan unzipped the bag, reached inside, and pulled out a simple glass bottle filled with a clear amber liquid. The chemical scanner instantly identified its contents. Ethanol, 40% concentration. Industrial solvent classification across most member worlds. Hazardous material. My pulse accelerated before I consciously understood why. I took one quick step forward. "Please hand me that bottle." Ethan looked at it, then back at me with complete confusion. "Why?" he asked. "Because direct exposure to open tissue could be extremely dangerous," I answered without hesitation. He blinked once, almost amused by the warning. "Really? Back home we used this all the time. Before anyone could move, before security could react, before the automated medical system could lock the room." Ethan loosened the cap with one smooth motion and slowly raised the bottle toward the injury. Every alarm in Trauma Bay 7 activated simultaneously, but none of those warning signals frightened me as much as the calm expression on the human's face, because in that exact moment I realized he truly believed he was about to do something completely ordinary. The first drops landed on the injury before anyone could reach him, and every alarm inside Trauma Bay 7 immediately shifted from caution to critical response. Bright warning lights reflected across the polished ceiling, while the station medical intelligence announced a hazardous chemical exposure event with perfect mechanical calm. Around me, experienced physicians froze in disbelief. One nurse instinctively stepped backward. Another covered his mouth in horror. Ethan Carter barely reacted. His shoulders tightened for less than a second as the liquid touched the damaged skin. Then his breathing settled back into a slow, even rhythm. There was no panic, no desperate struggle, no sign that he believed anything unusual had happened. Instead, he carefully set the bottle on the examination table and reached into his backpack again. I stared in disbelief as he removed a neatly folded piece of clean gauze, unfolded it with practiced precision, and gently cleaned the remaining moisture before inspecting the injury under the bright examination lights. It looked less like an emergency procedure and more like someone performing a familiar household chore. My medical scanners continued flooding the room with contradictory information. Heart rate stable, blood oxygen normal, neurological activity within expected human parameters, cellular stress response minimal. Every result directly contradicted the toxicology database that had trained physicians across the Galactic Alliance for generations. I immediately ordered a secondary scan. The results were identical. Then I ordered a third using an entirely different diagnostic platform manufactured by another civilization. Once again, the data refused to change. Ethan noticed my expression and gave me an apologetic smile. "I guess your equipment is not used to treating humans." His tone carried no arrogance. If anything, he sounded slightly embarrassed for causing extra work. One of my younger physicians finally found his voice. "Sir, does that not hurt?" Ethan considered the question honestly before answering. "Sure, it stings for a little while. That is kind of the point." The room fell completely silent. Stings. He had just described an industrial chemical that required emergency evacuation procedures on most inhabited worlds as something that merely stung. I walked closer, still unable to reconcile the readings with everything I had spent my career teaching. "You expected this reaction?" He nodded. "Absolutely. It helps clean the wound before I wrap it." Clean the wound. Not survive it. Not endure it. Clean it. The distinction echoed through my thoughts like an alarm louder than every warning siren in the room. While my staff remained frozen, Ethan calmly opened a small roll of medical tape and secured the fresh bandage with smooth, practiced movements that suggested he had repeated this routine many times before. There was no hesitation in his hands, no uncertainty in his expression, and certainly no indication that he believed he had just challenged the foundations of galactic medicine. Around us, the emergency alerts slowly began, shutting themselves off one by one as the scanners failed to detect the catastrophic biological collapse they had confidently predicted. Instead of watching a patient deteriorate, we watched an ordinary human quietly finish his own first aid, while an entire room full of alien medical professionals struggled to understand whether our science had failed or whether we had never truly understood humanity in the first place. I refused to accept the evidence until I could personally verify every number. Machines could fail. Sensors could drift out of calibration. Even the most advanced medical intelligence occasionally misidentified unfamiliar biology. But 3 independent diagnostic systems reaching the exact same conclusion was something I had never witnessed before. I instructed my staff to begin a complete metabolic analysis while Ethan Carter remained seated on the examination table, and to my surprise, he simply nodded. "Go ahead," he said. "If it helps. I have got nowhere urgent to be." There was no trace of impatience in his voice. No sign that he considered himself remarkable. As the scanners surrounded him, thousands of biological readings streamed across the central display. Bone density, muscle composition, blood chemistry, immune activity, nerve response, cellular repair, hydration, oxygen transport, and metabolic efficiency all appeared exactly where a healthy adult human should fall according to the limited Earth database available to us. My senior laboratory specialist looked up from her console with visible confusion. "Chief Medical Officer, there are no abnormalities." I stared at the report. "Run the comparison against enhanced military personnel." The artificial intelligence complied immediately. Result: negative. Run comparison against experimental genetic modification records. Again, the answer returned within seconds. Negative. Ethan watched us with growing curiosity. "Is everything all right?" I slowly lowered my tablet and asked the question that had become impossible to ignore. "Mr. Carter, have you ever received advanced biological enhancement of any kind?" He laughed softly. "No. I work in cargo logistics. The most advanced thing I have done recently is assemble flat-pack furniture in my apartment." Several members of my staff exchanged uncertain glances. That answer somehow made the situation even more unbelievable. We had all assumed that if a human could tolerate conditions this extraordinary, he must belong to some elite organization. Instead, the patient sitting in front of us spent his days organizing freight shipments. I requested access to the Earth Cultural Archive supplied through the Galactic Exchange Program. Millions of indexed records appeared almost instantly. Family first aid guides, outdoor safety manuals, workplace training courses, school health education, community emergency response programs, different regions, different generations, different professions. Yet one pattern appeared again and again. Ordinary people were expected to understand basic wound care long before they ever met a physician. Ethan noticed the educational videos playing across our display and smiled with recognition. I remember watching something like that in middle school, he said. Middle school. The words echoed through the room. We dedicated years of postgraduate medical education to subjects that human children apparently encountered before they were old enough to drive a car. One researcher quietly whispered, "Perhaps the human is exceptional because of his education." The archive answered that question before anyone else could. The lesson plans were marked as standard curriculum available across countless communities. There was nothing exclusive about them, nothing secret, nothing reserved for specialists. I finally understood the terrifying truth. We had spent the last hour searching for the extraordinary individual when we should have been studying the ordinary civilization. Ethan Carter was not surprising because he stood above humanity. He was surprising because he stood directly in the middle of it. And if an average human responded this calmly to a situation that had nearly caused an entire alien medical department to panic, then perhaps the greatest mystery in the room had never been the patient at all. It had always been the planet that raised him. The more evidence we gathered, the less confidence remained inside Meridian Station's medical department. I ordered the station intelligence to expand its search beyond human biology and focus instead on Earth's environmental history. If Ethan Carter truly represented the average member of his species, then the explanation had to begin long before he entered my examination room. The first planetary report appeared across the central display, and every physician instinctively moved closer. Earth was not described as an exceptionally stable world. Seasonal temperature swings reached levels that would require controlled habitats on many civilized planets. Powerful storms developed with little warning. Rugged mountains, dense forests, scorching deserts, frozen landscapes, and vast oceans all existed on the same world. Even more surprising was the sheer diversity of microscopic life. The environmental scanner listed countless naturally occurring bacteria and fungi that humans encountered throughout their daily lives. Instead of avoiding every biological challenge, their civilization had evolved alongside them while constantly developing practical ways to stay healthy. Ethan watched the presentation with mild curiosity before quietly saying, "Honestly, that just looks like home." Nobody answered him. We were too busy reading. Another report compared Earth's household safety recommendations with those of the Galactic Alliance. The contrast was astonishing. Most advanced civilizations focused almost entirely on preventing accidents through automation and environmental control. Human recommendations assumed accidents would eventually happen despite every precaution. Rather than promising perfect safety, they emphasized preparation, awareness, and simple responses that ordinary people could perform immediately. Emergency kits were recommended for homes, vehicles, workplaces, hiking trips, and even family vacations. Basic first aid was treated as a life skill rather than a specialized profession. My deputy physician slowly lowered her data tablet and whispered, "They prepare everyone, not because they expect disaster every day, but because they refuse to be helpless when something unexpected happens." That single observation explained more than any laboratory analysis had managed to reveal. Humanity had not built a culture around fear. They had built one around readiness. Ethan noticed our expressions and gave a small smile. "My parents always said it was better to have something and never need it than need it and not have it." The sentence sounded simple, almost ordinary, but the chamber became completely silent. Across dozens of civilizations, emergency knowledge had gradually become concentrated inside professional institutions. On Earth, practical survival knowledge had remained part of everyday family life. The station intelligence continued processing cultural records until one final comparison appeared on the screen. Human children routinely learned basic responses to common injuries before reaching adulthood. The lessons were calm, practical, and repeated often enough to become second nature. There was no celebration of danger and no attempt to appear fearless. The goal was simply to remain useful when problems appeared. I finally looked directly at Ethan Carter, no longer seeing an unusual patient. I saw the product of a civilization that quietly trained ordinary people to solve immediate problems without panic. At that moment, I realized our greatest misunderstanding had never been about one chemical or one medical procedure. It was about the mindset behind them. We believed resilience began after an emergency. Humanity had spent generations teaching resilience long before emergencies ever happened, and that invisible difference had accomplished something our advanced technology never could. It had made calm preparation feel completely ordinary. By the following morning, Meridian Station no longer felt like a hospital. It felt like the center of the largest scientific investigation in recent memory. Requests for our diagnostic records arrived faster than we could process them. Universities, research laboratories, military medical divisions, and planetary health agencies all wanted access to the same question. How could one completely ordinary human remain so calm during a procedure that every other known species classified as dangerously reckless? I approved the release of every non-confidential medical record because there was no point hiding the truth. The data spoke more clearly than any physician ever could. While the reports were being transmitted across the Alliance, Ethan Carter quietly thanked my staff for their assistance and prepared to leave. Before he reached the exit, I stopped him with one final request. Would you allow us to ask a few additional questions? He adjusted the strap of his backpack and smiled. Sure, as long as I do not miss my delivery schedule. Even then he was thinking about work. My assistant activated a recording terminal, and the interview began. Mr. Carter, I asked, how often have you treated injuries like this yourself? He thought for only a moment. Nothing serious, but little cuts and scrapes? Plenty of times. Another physician immediately followed. Were you formally trained? Ethan looked genuinely surprised by the question. Everybody gets taught basic first aid where I grew up. Parents teach you. Schools teach you. Workplaces review it. It is just something people are expected to know. The room became perfectly still. Every answer sounded so ordinary to him, and so extraordinary to us. One xenobiologist requested permission to compare human educational standards with those of every Alliance member species. The results arrived within minutes. Across most civilizations, emergency medical knowledge remained concentrated among licensed professionals because advanced technology handled nearly every routine accident. Human civilization had taken a completely different path. Instead of depending entirely on professionals, it expected ordinary citizens to stabilize a situation until professional help became available. The philosophy itself was unlike anything recorded in galactic history. My deputy physician quietly summarized the comparison in a single sentence. They did not build a society where accidents never happen. They built a society where ordinary people are prepared when they do. Ethan nodded as though the conclusion was obvious. That is pretty much it. You cannot always wait for someone else. Nobody argued. Every answer fit perfectly with the evidence. Surrounding us, the calm expression, the organized backpack, the confidence without arrogance. None of it came from extraordinary genetics or secret military training. It came from repetition, education, and habit. At that moment, another notification appeared on my medical tablet. The Galactic Medical Council had officially requested every recording from Trauma Bay 7 for immediate review under emergency scientific authority. During my entire career, that level of attention had been reserved for discoveries capable of changing medicine itself. I looked through the observation window at Ethan Carter as he thanked a nurse for replacing the medical tape he had used from our supplies. He apologized for causing extra paperwork and casually asked which corridor led toward the station cafe because he had skipped breakfast. Watching him walk away, I finally understood the irony that would echo throughout the galaxy for years to come. The most important medical discovery of our generation had never realized it had discovered anything at all. The Galactic Medical Council assembled only 48 hours after receiving our reports, a timetable so short that every physician on Meridian Station immediately understood the significance. Normally, scientific reviews lasted months before reaching even a preliminary conclusion. This time the council declared an emergency session, not because of an epidemic or a newly discovered pathogen, but because one completely ordinary human had quietly challenged assumptions that had guided interstellar medicine for centuries. I was ordered to present every diagnostic record personally. The chamber contained representatives from more than 60 member worlds, each considered an authority in medicine, biology, or environmental science. Their questions began before I had even finished introducing the case. Had the patient received military enhancements? No. Did Earth issue specialized medical kits to civilians? No. Were his biological readings exceptional compared with other humans? Again, no. Every answer pushed the discussion further away from Ethan Carter himself and closer toward humanity as a whole. Then the council requested something unexpected. They wanted the complete inventory from the backpack Ethan had carried into my emergency room. The customs office forwarded the list within minutes. 1 bottle of rubbing alcohol, adhesive bandages, sterile gauze, medical tape, small scissors, tweezers, disposable gloves, basic pain relievers, antiseptic wipes, a compact instruction card. The chamber remained silent while every item appeared on the central display. Finally, one toxicologist asked the question none of us had considered before. Is this specialized equipment? I contacted Ethan through the station communications network. He answered almost immediately, apologizing because he was unloading cargo and had grease on his hands. When I asked about the contents of his backpack, he sounded genuinely confused. Specialized? No. You can buy all of that almost anywhere back home. Pharmacies, grocery stores, convenience stores. Most people keep something similar in the house or in the car. I activated the speaker so everyone could hear his response. Several council members looked at one another in complete disbelief. The chair politely thanked Ethan for his time, ended the connection, and turned back toward the assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, he said quietly, we have spent decades classifying human resilience as an unusual biological phenomenon. We now possess compelling evidence that it is also a cultural phenomenon. Environmental researchers immediately presented additional findings. Human communities regularly encouraged practical preparedness through schools, workplaces, outdoor recreation, and family traditions. The objective was not to create fearless citizens. The objective was to create capable citizens who could remain useful during unexpected situations. That distinction fundamentally changed the interpretation of every medical report we had reviewed. Humanity had never depended entirely on experts because it had spent generations teaching ordinary people to solve ordinary problems before professional help arrived. The discussion lasted for hours, but by the end no one questioned the central conclusion. Ethan Carter had not impressed the galaxy because he possessed extraordinary abilities. He had impressed us because he represented millions of people who quietly carried the same knowledge, the same habits, and the same calm confidence without ever considering themselves remarkable. As I left the chamber that evening, I realized the investigation had already outgrown medicine. We were no longer studying how one human healed. We were beginning to understand how an entire civilization had learned to prepare first, remain calm second, and panic only if every other option had already failed. 1 week later, the Galactic Medical Council invited Ethan Carter to appear before the full assembly, not as a witness under investigation, but as an ordinary citizen they hoped could answer one simple question. When I found him at Docking Ring 4, he was helping another cargo worker reorganize several shipping containers after a scheduling mistake delayed an outbound freighter. There were no cameras, no reporters, and no ceremony. He wiped his hands on a clean cloth, thanked his supervisor for the extra shift, and followed me toward the council chamber without asking whether the meeting would change his life. During the walk, he only had one concern. Am I in trouble? I could not help smiling. Mr. Carter, I believe the opposite is true. You may have just changed galactic medicine. He laughed politely, assuming I was exaggerating. The council chamber fell completely silent when Ethan entered. Hundreds of physicians, researchers, and educators from across known space watched the human take his seat with the same calm expression he had shown inside my emergency room. The chair of the council began with an unexpectedly simple question. Mr. Carter, who taught you how to treat a wound? Ethan answered immediately. My parents first, then teachers at school. Later, my employer reviewed first aid during workplace safety training. Nothing unusual. Several council members exchanged confused looks. One senior physician leaned forward. Your parents were medical professionals? Ethan shook his head. No, my dad repaired electrical systems. My mom taught elementary school. A wave of quiet whispers spread across the chamber. The chair continued. Then why did they teach you emergency medical procedures? Ethan looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Because parents teach their kids practical things. Cooking, changing a tire, using basic tools. First aid. You never know when somebody might need help before professionals arrive. That answer landed with more force than any scientific presentation could have achieved. Every assumption the council had built over generations suddenly appeared incomplete. Another representative activated the Central Archive and compared childhood education across Alliance civilizations. The results confirmed what we had already begun to suspect. Most advanced societies relied almost entirely on automated emergency systems and specialized responders. Humanity had chosen another path. They invested in professionals, but they also expected ordinary people to become the first line of assistance during everyday emergencies. The philosophy was not built around fear. It was built around responsibility. One cultural anthropologist quietly summarized the difference. Humans do not expect everyone to become doctors. They expect everyone to remain useful. Ethan smiled and nodded. Exactly. You help if you can. Then the experts take over. The chamber remained silent for several long moments. Nobody challenged him because there was nothing to challenge. His explanation matched every educational record, every family guide, every workplace manual, and every community safety program we had reviewed. At last I understood why the events inside Trauma Bay 7 had felt so impossible. We had mistaken ordinary preparation for extraordinary courage. Ethan Carter had never tried to prove that humans were exceptional. He had simply lived according to lessons taught to millions of children on Earth. And without realizing it, that quiet confidence had forced an entire galaxy to reconsider what true resilience really meant. The council adjourned only after approving the most comprehensive medical reform in its history. What surprised everyone was not the speed of the decision, but the complete absence of disagreement. Representatives from worlds that had spent centuries debating minor procedural updates unanimously agreed that humanity could no longer be treated as just another entry in the Galactic Medical Index. A new category was created before the session even ended. Human emergency response would become a mandatory subject for every physician seeking certification to practice interspecies medicine. The announcement spread across the Alliance within hours. Medical universities immediately requested access to Earth's publicly available first aid curriculum. Research institutes began translating human educational material into hundreds of languages. Training simulations that had remained unchanged for decades were rewritten to include scenarios involving human patients whose responses could not be judged by traditional galactic assumptions. I watched the updates appear one after another across my terminal, realizing that none of them existed because of a revolutionary machine, an experimental medicine, or a scientific breakthrough. They existed because one ordinary cargo worker calmly demonstrated habits he believed every responsible adult should know. Ethan Carter remained almost completely detached from the attention surrounding him. After leaving the council chamber, he politely declined several interview requests, explaining that his employer was already short on workers and he had promised to finish unloading a transport before the end of his shift. That answer circulated almost as quickly as the medical report itself. Many researchers expected someone who had become the center of galactic discussion to seek recognition. Instead, the human returned to work because, in his words, people are waiting on those deliveries. I quietly followed from a distance later that afternoon. There was nothing extraordinary about what I witnessed. Ethan greeted coworkers by name, helped a new employee organize shipping manifests, stopped to answer questions from a maintenance technician who looked lost, and reminded another worker to wear protective gloves before handling rough cargo containers. None of those actions were dramatic. Yet together they revealed something our investigations had overlooked until that moment. Preparation, responsibility, and helping others were not isolated behaviors for humans. They were connected habits repeated throughout everyday life. The more I observed, the clearer the pattern became. Humanity had not created resilience through a single lesson or a single profession. It had built resilience through thousands of ordinary decisions made by ordinary people who expected one another to contribute whenever possible. That evening, the council released its official closing statement. It contained only one sentence that would eventually appear in every revised medical textbook across known space. When treating a human patient, first understand the civilization before attempting to understand the symptoms. Those words transformed medical education forever because they acknowledged a truth our technology alone had failed to discover. Biology explained how humans healed. Culture explained why they remained so calm while healing. As the station lights dimmed for the night cycle, I looked across the cargo bay and saw Ethan Carter laughing with coworkers over cups of coffee after another routine day of work. Nobody around him seemed to realize they were standing beside the individual who had quietly changed the future of galactic medicine. Then again, perhaps that was the final lesson humanity had been teaching us all along. The people who reshape history are not always the ones trying to become legends. Sometimes they are simply the ones who never stop doing ordinary things remarkably well. 6 standard months after Ethan Carter quietly walked out of Meridian Station with nothing more than a healed arm and a nearly forgotten appointment, the final revision of the Galactic Emergency Medicine Manual arrived on my desk. I expected updated chemical charts, revised treatment protocols, and new diagnostic recommendations. Those changes were certainly there, but what caught my attention was the opening paragraph. It read, "When evaluating a human patient, physicians must first consider environmental adaptation, cultural conditioning, and practical first aid traditions before applying standard galactic biological assumptions." I read the sentence 3 times because I knew exactly where it had begun. It had not started inside a laboratory or a research institute. It had started in my examination room when one calm human politely ignored my panic and performed a routine task he had learned as a child. The revised manual included a complete educational case study based on the events we had witnessed. Ethan's identity remained protected at his request, yet every future physician would study the encounter during their first year of medical education. New simulation programs challenged students to recognize the difference between genuine emergencies and unfamiliar human practices. Cultural awareness courses became mandatory alongside anatomy and pharmacology. Human universities accepted invitations to exchange instructors with Alliance medical academies. And for the first time in galactic history, practical first aid education became a shared field of international research rather than a collection of isolated traditions. Several weeks later, I received a personal message from Ethan. It was remarkably short. He thanked my staff for treating him with kindness, apologized once again for creating so much unexpected paperwork, and mentioned that the injury had healed so well he could barely remember which arm had been hurt. At the end of the message, he added one final sentence. "Hopefully next time we meet it will just be over coffee." I smiled despite myself. That simple invitation reminded me of something our entire civilization had almost forgotten. The strongest people rarely spend their lives trying to prove they are strong. They simply keep moving forward while everyone else struggles to understand them. Years have passed since that unforgettable day, and young physicians still ask me whether the famous story is true. They expect me to describe extraordinary biology, impossible endurance, or mysterious human genetics. Instead, I always tell them the same thing. The biology mattered, but it was never the real lesson. The real lesson was that resilience does not suddenly appear during a crisis. It is quietly built through ordinary habits, practical knowledge, shared responsibility, and calm preparation repeated across generations. Humanity did not astonish the galaxy because they never faced danger. They astonished us because they accepted that uncertainty was part of life and taught ordinary people how to respond without surrendering to fear. Looking back now, I no longer remember the alarms, the flashing warning lights, or the confusion that filled Trauma Bay 7. I remember one ordinary human standing calmly in front of a room full of frightened experts, completely unaware that his everyday habits were about to change the future of galactic medicine forever. That was the day we finally stopped asking why humans survived challenges that terrified everyone else. We began asking a far better question. What else had humanity quietly mastered while the rest of us were too busy assuming they were fragile?